I wasn't supposed to hear that conversation. I had no business being there, but life has a funny way of dropping the truth right into your lap when you least expect it. Heather was in the living room, chatting on the phone. I was upstairs, supposed to be fixing the leaking faucet in our bathroom, but the moment I heard Josh's name come up, I couldn't stop myself from listening. I don't know why, maybe it was the way she said his name, soft and familiar, too familiar. I had a weird gut feeling, like something was wrong, but I just stood at the top of the stairs and listened. "I know, baby," Heather said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "It was so close last time. Oliver's been suspicious, but I think I've managed to keep him off our trail." I felt my stomach drop. It was like someone punched me right in the gut, and I couldn't breathe. I had to stop myself from storming down there and demanding answers. I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. She kept talking, laughing even, about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. About how dumb I was to trust her so much. And then Josh's voice, my best friend's voice, came through the speaker clear as day, saying something like, "Don't worry, Heather. He'll never know. He's too busy with work to notice what's right in front of him." I wanted to scream, throw something, maybe even hit someone. But I didn't. I stood there frozen, feeling the heat rise to my face, my fists clenched so hard I thought I'd break my own bones. Heather kept talking, like they were planning a grocery run or something, like this wasn't the biggest betrayal I'd ever experienced. But I waited. I didn't storm in there because, honestly, I didn't know what to do. My marriage, my friendship, it all felt like it was slipping away in a second. How the hell do you handle something like that? I backed away from the stairs slowly, trying not to make a sound. I needed time. Time to think, time to figure out what I was gonna do. I couldn't let them know that I knew. Not yet. The hardest part? I didn't feel anger right away. It was more like shock, followed by this crushing sadness. Heather had been my wife for years, and Josh? Man, he was like a brother to me. We'd been through thick and thin together. But now, I didn't know who they were anymore. That night, I went to bed like nothing happened. Heather curled up next to me like she always did, but her touch felt different, foreign, cold. I didn't move, just stared at the ceiling, wondering when I'd stopped noticing the distance between us. A few days passed, and I tried to act normal. Every time Heather kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, or Josh came by to hang out like nothing was wrong, I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat. It took everything I had to keep from snapping. But I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet. I needed more. I started paying closer attention. Heather's phone, her little comments when Josh's name came up, the way she acted when she thought I wasn't watching. I could feel myself slipping into this paranoia, but what else was I supposed to do? I couldn't just accuse them without proof, right? And what if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head? Then one night Carla, Josh's wife, came by unexpectedly. Carla and I had always gotten along fine, but we weren't close. So when she showed up at my door, looking all nervous and jittery, I knew something was up. I invited her in, and we sat at the kitchen table in this awkward silence for what felt like forever. She took a deep breath, and that's when she dropped the bombshell. "I know about Josh and Heather," she said, her voice trembling a little. "I've known for a while." I was speechless. I just stared at her, my mind racing. All the anger I'd been holding back for days boiled up to the surface, but instead of exploding I just said, "How long?" Carla looked down at her hands, fiddling with her wedding ring. "A few months, at least. I found out by accident." He left his phone out, and I saw the texts. For some reason, hearing it from her made it all feel more real. Like up until that moment, I could convince myself it wasn't really happening. But now? There was no denying it. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She laughed bitterly. "I could ask you the same thing. Why haven't you confronted them?" I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat there, feeling stupid. Carla continued, her eyes burning with a kind of intensity one hadn't seen in her before. "Look, I didn't come here to make you feel bad, Oliver. I came because, well, I think we can help each other." "Help each other?" I repeated, not sure where she was going with this. "Yeah," she said, leaning in a little. "I'm not the type to sit back and let them make a fool of me. I want to make them pay for what they've done. And I think, maybe you do too." Her words hit me like a truck. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening, but another part of me, a darker part, liked the idea. Heather and Josh had been sneaking around behind our backs, lying to us, laughing at us. And now, here was Carla, offering me a chance at some kind of payback. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, even though I already knew where this was going. She looked me dead in the eye. "We get back at them. Together." I didn't know what to say. I mean, on one hand, this felt like something out of a soap opera. On the other hand, I was so angry and hurt that revenge sounded right. Fair, even. "How?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Carla hesitated for a moment, then said, "We have an affair of our own. And if we're lucky, maybe Josh will end up raising a kid that isn't his." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was crazy, completely insane, but at the same time, it made a twisted kind of sense. If they could betray us like this, why should we play by the rules? I didn't answer right away. I just looked at Carla, trying to figure out if she was serious. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the perfect way to turn the tables on them. "Are you serious about this?" I asked, still a little in shock. Carla nodded. "Dead serious." I thought about Heather and Josh, sneaking around, thinking they were so clever. Then I thought about the months of lies, the betrayal, the way Heather had been lying to my face. Maybe this was exactly what they deserved. "All right," I said finally. "I'm in." After agreeing to Carla's plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a nosedive into some twisted movie plot. But there I was, sitting in my own kitchen, plotting revenge with the wife of my best friend. The strangest part? It didn't feel wrong. It felt like the only thing that made sense anymore. "So how do we do this?" I asked, leaning forward, ready to hear whatever crazy scheme Carla had come up with. Carla smirked, like she had been waiting for that question. "First, we need to be smart. We can't just jump into bed and call it a day. If we're gonna do this, we need to make sure they don't suspect anything. We keep things secret, just like they have been." I nodded, even though a part of me was still nervous about what we were getting into. Carla continued, her voice calm and determined. "I've been tracking Josh's movements for a while," she said, pulling out her phone. "He's careless. He leaves his phone out, doesn't bother deleting messages. It wasn't hard to figure out when he's meeting Heather. I bet Heather's just as sloppy." She was right. Heather had been acting suspicious, but she never really covered her tracks. It didn't take much for me to remember all the times she'd been working late or grabbing drinks with coworkers. Josh had been there for a lot of those nights, always conveniently available for last-minute plans. Carla's plan was simple. We'd keep tabs on Heather and Josh, using their own routines against them. We'd start our own affair, but in a way that made sure they never suspected us. If they were going to sneak around, so could we, only we'd be smarter about it. And then came the kicker. "If I get pregnant," Carla said, her eyes narrowing, "Josh will have no idea it isn't his. He'll raise my baby, thinking it's his own, and by the time he finds out, if he ever does, it'll be too late." The thought made my heart race. The idea of Carla getting pregnant with my child. It was wild. But at the same time, I couldn't help but picture Josh, the smug grin wiped off his face when he realized he'd been raising my kid all along. It was dark, twisted revenge. But that's what they deserved, right? How do we make sure they don't catch on? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. Carla smiled, pulling out something I hadn't expected, a small device that looked like a phone charger. "I've already tapped Josh's phone," she said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "We can do the same with Heather's. That way, we'll know where they are, what they're saying. We'll always be one step ahead." It sounded insane. I mean, tapping phones? Getting pregnant on purpose? It was the kind of thing I'd only ever seen in movies. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Heather and Josh had been lying to us for months. They thought they were smarter than us, that they'd never get caught. Well, they were wrong. "All right," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do it." Carla grinned, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. We spent the next hour going over the details, making sure everything was airtight. I was surprised by how calm I felt, like I had finally found some kind of control in this mess. Heather and Josh thought they had us fooled, but now we had the upper hand. We agreed to meet again in a few days, once we had a clearer picture of their schedules. Carla left my house, giving me a quick, almost businesslike kiss on the cheek before she walked out the door. It was strange, but I didn't feel guilty. Not yet, anyway. All I could think about was how good it was going to feel to watch Josh's world crumble, just like he had shattered mine. As I watched Carla drive away, I knew there was no turning back. The plan was set, and from now on, we were playing by our own rules. The first time Carla and I slept together, it felt strange. Not wrong exactly, but like we were both stepping over a line that couldn't be uncrossed. We'd planned it out so carefully, picking a time when we knew Josh and Heather were both busy. Josh was supposedly on a business trip, and Heather had one of her late-night work events. Carla came over to my place, casual like she was just swinging by for a quick chat. But the tension in the air was thick, and we both knew what we were really there for. We sat on the couch for a bit, talking like everything was normal, but I could feel the weight of what was coming. Carla looked at me, her eyes searching mine, like she was making sure I was still on board. "You ready for this?" she asked softly, though her voice had a determined edge to it. I nodded. There wasn't really any turning back now. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She leaned in first, kissing me gently at first, then harder, more urgently. Everything happened fast after that. We didn't waste time, there was no awkwardness, just a sense of purpose, like we both knew exactly what we were doing and why. It wasn't about passion or love, it was about revenge. About taking back control. When it was over, we lay there in silence for a while, both of us staring up at the ceiling. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt good, sure, but there was also this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. Was this really the right way to handle things? Was getting back at Heather and Josh worth sinking to their level? But then I thought about all the lies, all the sneaking around, and the way they made me feel like a fool. And just like that, the guilt disappeared. This wasn't wrong, it was fair. They started this, not us. Carla rolled over to face me, her expression serious. "You okay?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Yeah," I lied. "Just processing, I guess." She nodded, understanding. "We're in this together, Oliver," she said quietly. "Whatever happens next, we stick to the plan." "Right." I nodded again. "Right." After a while, Carla got dressed and left, making sure everything looked normal, like she had just stopped by for coffee. We both knew we had to keep up appearances. No one could suspect anything, not yet. The stakes were too high. Over the next few weeks, things felt different. Carla and I kept seeing each other in secret, slipping away when we knew Josh and Heather were preoccupied. It felt weird, being so calculated about everything, but at the same time, it gave me a rush. Every time I got a text from Heather saying she was working late, I'd smile to myself, knowing I was doing the exact same thing behind her back. The hardest part was acting normal around Josh. He had no idea, no clue that his wife and I were plotting this behind his back. Whenever we hung out, I'd catch myself wondering how he could sit there so casually, like nothing had changed. It took everything I had to keep from laughing sometimes, thinking about how oblivious he was to what was really going on. But even as Carla and I got deeper into our plan, something started to shift inside me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. I started feeling things I wasn't supposed to feel. Carla wasn't just Josh's wife anymore. She was something more. One night, after we'd spent hours together, she looked at me differently. "You know," she said softly, "this doesn't have to just be about getting back at them." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, but there was a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Maybe this is our chance to be happy too. Not just about them." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected to feel anything real in all of this. But now, looking at Carla, I wondered if maybe she was right. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Heather, asking when I'd be home. I felt that familiar wave of disgust wash over me, but this time it was mixed with something else. Uncertainty. I told Carla I had to go, but her words stayed with me long after I left. After that night, Carla's words echoed in my head more than I wanted to admit. This whole thing was supposed to be about revenge, about getting back at Heather and Josh for betraying us. But now it felt like something was shifting. Carla had planted this seed in my mind, that maybe this wasn't just about payback anymore, that maybe there was something real between us. But could there be? Was I really falling for her, or was it just the thrill of the whole situation messing with my head? The next few days were a blur. I tried to focus on work, tried to act normal around Heather, but I could feel the tension building inside me. Every time I saw her, every time she smiled at me or asked how my day was, I had to fight the urge to throw her lies right back in her face. I knew what she was doing behind my back, and now, every little thing she did just felt like an insult. One night, I got home late. Heather was already in bed, scrolling through her phone, acting like everything was normal. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, wondering how long she'd been lying to me, wondering if there had ever been a time she was truly faithful. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, looking up at me with this concerned expression that made me want to scream. "Yeah, just tired," I said, forcing a smile. I climbed into bed next to her, the same way I had so many times before. But it felt different now. Every time I looked at her, all I could see were the lies, the betrayal, and the way she had made a fool of me. A few days later, Carla texted me, asking if I could meet her at the little motel we'd been using. I agreed, but something felt off. This wasn't like the other times. When I got there, she seemed distant, distracted. "We need to talk," she said as soon as I walked in. "Talk?" I asked, feeling a lump form in my throat. "About what?" Carla sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "About us. About what we're doing." I sat next to her, waiting for her to continue. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This whole thing. It's getting complicated." "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I had a feeling I knew exactly what she meant. Carla sighed, running her fingers through her hair. "At first, this was just about revenge. About making them pay for what they did to us. But now," she looked up at me, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite read. "Now I don't know. I'm starting to feel things I didn't expect." I felt a wave of panic rise up in me. I hadn't been ready for this conversation, for the reality of what we'd started to finally catch up to us. "Carla, But she cut me off, shaking her head. "I know you feel it too, Oliver. This isn't just about them anymore, is it?" I didn't know how to answer that. I'd been so focused on getting back at Heather and Josh, on keeping everything secret, that I hadn't stopped to think about what it all really meant. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. "I didn't expect this either." Carla nodded, looking relieved that I was being honest. I don't want to get hurt again, Oliver. And I don't want to hurt you either." I sat there in silence, trying to make sense of it all. The revenge, the affair, the feelings that were starting to creep in. It was all too much, too fast. I had wanted to make Heather and Josh pay, but now I didn't know what I wanted anymore. "I don't want to hurt you either," I said finally, meaning every word. Carla smiled softly, but there was still a sadness in her eyes. "Maybe we should slow things down," she suggested. "We can still do this, still get back at them. But, let's not get too wrapped up in it." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe slowing down was exactly what we needed. This whole thing had already gotten way more complicated than I'd ever imagined. We spent the rest of the evening together, but it was different. Softer. Less about revenge, more about connection. I still wasn't sure what was happening between us, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was spiraling out of control. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Carla had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe we needed to step back and figure out what we were really doing. But even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Things were already in motion, and there was no way to stop them now. After that talk with Carla, things did slow down a bit, at least on the surface. We didn't meet up as often, and when we did, it wasn't always about physical stuff. We actually talked more, shared more about our lives. But deep down, I knew we were still moving forward with the plan. The strange thing? I felt less guilty about it now. Maybe it was because I was finally starting to see Heather for what she really was, a liar, a cheat, someone who'd been playing me for a fool all this time. And Josh? Well, he wasn't much better. Every time he texted me to grab a beer or hang out, I had to bite my tongue to keep from spilling everything. Heather was still doing her usual routine, lying about work, disappearing for hours without any real explanation. I watched her more closely now, keeping tabs on her like Carla had suggested. It wasn't hard. She wasn't exactly subtle. Carla and I tapped Heather's phone, just like we'd planned. It was surprisingly easy. I pretended I was upgrading some chargers around the house, and Heather barely even noticed. A couple of days later, we were listening in on her conversations, reading her texts. Every lie, every little excuse she gave me, we caught it all. I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. Listening to her and Josh talk, hearing them plan their little meetings while thinking they were so clever, it made me feel like I had the upper hand again. But at the same time, it was hard to hear. Hard to listen to Heather talk about me like I didn't matter. One night, Carla and I were going over the latest recordings when we stumbled on something unexpected. "I can't wait to see you again," Heather's voice came through, followed by Josh's. "Soon. We need to be more careful though. Oliver's been acting weird lately." That stopped me cold. "They're getting suspicious," Carla muttered, her face tense. I nodded, feeling my stomach twist. This was a dangerous game, and we were starting to get too close to being caught. "We need to be careful too," I said. "We can't let them figure out we know." Carla agreed, and we both decided to lay low for a bit. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were coming to a head. We'd started this plan for revenge, but now it felt like we were heading into uncharted territory. And the craziest part? I didn't want to stop. Laying low wasn't easy. Every time I looked at Heather, knowing what I knew, it took everything in me not to explode. But I kept it together, sticking to the plan. Carla and I agreed to cut down on our meetups for a while. It was safer that way, but it didn't stop us from texting constantly, talking late into the night about everything, our spouses, the affair, even life outside of this mess. One evening, Heather came home early. I hadn't expected her for at least another hour, so when I heard her keys jingling in the door, I panicked. My phone was open on the couch, a message from Carla still on the screen. I snatched it up and shoved it in my pocket just as Heather walked in. "Hey," she said casually, setting her purse down. "What are you up to?" "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just catching up on some emails." Heather gave me a quick glance, like she was looking for something, but then she shrugged and headed toward the kitchen. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was a close call. Too close. After that, I knew I had to be even more careful. Heather wasn't dumb, careless maybe, but not dumb. If she got even a hint that I was hiding something, she'd dig until she found it. And with Carla and me still tracking their every move, we couldn't afford to slip up now. A couple of nights later, Carla called me in a panic. "I think Josh is onto something," she said, her voice tight. "He's been asking weird questions about my schedule, where I've been. I think he's suspicious." That sent a wave of anxiety through me. If Josh was catching on, it was only a matter of time before he started looking into everything. And if he found out what we were doing, well, I didn't even want to think about the fallout. "Just act normal," I told Carla, trying to sound calm even though my heart was racing. "Don't change anything. We stick to the plan." Carla agreed, but I could hear the worry in her voice. She was scared, and honestly, so was I. But we couldn't back out now. Not when we were so deep into it. Josh and Heather had no idea how close we were to tearing their little world apart. And that thought, knowing we still had the upper hand, was enough to keep me going. The tension in the house was getting unbearable. Every little thing Heather did started to grate on me, her fake smiles, the way she acted like nothing was wrong when I knew everything. Every time she lied about working late, I had to hold back from calling her out, from throwing it all in her face. But I didn't. I kept playing my part, even though it was getting harder with each passing day. Carla and I stayed in contact, but we kept our meetings brief and rare. We couldn't risk it. We both knew Josh was watching her more closely now, asking questions, getting suspicious. Every time I got a text from Carla, I double-checked to make sure Heather wasn't around, paranoid she might glance over my shoulder at the wrong moment. One night, while Heather was in the shower, I caught myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. The urge to pick it up and scroll through her messages was strong, but I resisted. I already knew everything I needed to know. Besides, we were still tapping her phone. I didn't need to snoop when I had all the evidence waiting for me in those recordings. But as I sat there, listening to the sound of water running, I felt this growing sense of dread. How long could I keep this up? How long before everything came crashing down? Later that night, after Heather had fallen asleep, I found myself texting Carla. "Me, you think they're gonna catch on?" She replied almost immediately. "Carla, not if we're careful. We just have to play it cool. We're still in control." But were we? It didn't feel like it. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, one wrong step away from disaster. A few days later, I overheard Heather on the phone with Josh again. She was sitting in the living room, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. No, he's been totally clueless, she said, her voice dripping with smugness. I think I've got him wrapped around my finger. Hearing her talk like that, so sure of herself, made my blood boil. She thought I was clueless? She had no idea how much I already knew, how deep I was in this game now. Carla and I were in this for the long haul, and no matter how shaky things were getting, I wasn't backing out. Not when we were so close to getting what we wanted. Heather and Josh thought they had it all figured out, but they didn't see us coming. It was getting harder to act normal. Every time Heather looked at me, I felt like she could see right through me, even though I knew she was still completely in the dark. She kept on with her little lies, texting Josh, sneaking off to meet him, like I was too stupid to notice. But pretending I didn't know, it was exhausting. One evening, while Heather was out on one of her so-called work dinners, Carla and I met up again. We didn't go to the motel this time. We decided it was too risky, with Josh already getting suspicious. Instead, we met at a park on the outskirts of town, far enough away that no one would recognize us. We sat on a bench, side by side, watching as the sky turned orange with the setting sun. Carla looked tense, her fingers fidgeting with her phone. Josh asked me again today, she said quietly. He's getting more paranoid. He asked why I've been acting strange lately. And what did you say? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I told him it was work stress, she said with a half-hearted smile. But he didn't look convinced. Oliver, I think he's starting to put the pieces together. That made my stomach drop. If Josh figured things out, it would be over for both of us. There was too much at stake, too much we'd both lose if they caught on. We just need to hold on a little longer, I said, trying to reassure her, but also myself. We've come this far. We can't let them win. Carla sighed, leaning back on the bench. I know. It's just, this is getting harder than I thought it would be. I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't just about keeping the secret anymore. There was something else, something deeper. The longer we stayed in this mess, the more the lines were blurring between what was real and what wasn't. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Carla turned to me, her face serious. Do you ever wonder, what happens after all this? After we get our revenge? The question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't really thought about what came after. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on making Heather and Josh pay, that I hadn't thought about the future, about what came next for me and Carla. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I haven't thought that far ahead. Carla nodded, her expression unreadable. Maybe we should start. As the darkness settled around us, I realized she was right. We couldn't keep living like this forever. At some point, something was going to break, and we needed to be ready for when it did. After that conversation with Carla, the weight of everything started to feel heavier. We were playing a dangerous game, and I could feel the end creeping closer, like a storm building in the distance. But I wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Not when I could still see Heather and Josh acting like they had nothing to lose. The tension between Heather and me kept growing. It was in the way she moved around the house, the way she avoided my eyes when I asked simple questions, the way she'd smile at me like everything was perfectly fine. But I could see the cracks. They were small at first, but they were growing. One night, after dinner, I finally asked her something that had been eating at me for weeks. When are you going to tell me the truth? Heather froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She blinked at me, playing dumb. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You know exactly what I mean. The late nights. The work trips. Josh. When are you going to stop lying to me? Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. Too quickly. I don't know what you're talking about, Oliver. I stared at her, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. She was still lying, still pretending like I hadn't already figured it all out. You've been cheating on me with Josh for months, Heather. Don't even try to deny it. Her eyes widened, but she didn't respond right away. For a second, I thought I had her. I thought maybe this was the moment she'd finally break down and admit everything. But instead, she laughed. It was a cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. You really are paranoid, aren't you? She said, shaking her head. I've told you 100 times, there's nothing going on between me and Josh. You're imagining things. It was like hitting a wall. I couldn't believe it. Even when I'd given her the chance to come clean, she still chose to lie. To gaslight me. I'm not imagining anything, I said, my voice low but firm. I know what you've been doing, Heather. I've seen the texts. I've heard the calls. That shut her up. For a moment, her confident mask slipped, and I saw the panic flash across her face. But just as quickly, she pulled herself back together. If you want to believe your crazy conspiracy theories, fine, she said, standing up from the table. But I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. She grabbed her phone and stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there, staring at the empty chair where she'd been just seconds before. I didn't chase after her. There was no point. I knew she wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. But the confrontation had left a bad taste in my mouth. Heather wasn't just cheating. She was trying to make me think I was the one losing it. That was the part that stung the most. Later that night, I texted Carla, telling her what had happened. She still won't admit it. She just keeps lying. Carla, same with Josh. It's like they think we're blind. I sat in bed, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. This couldn't go on much longer. Something had to give. And deep down, I knew the breaking point was just around the corner. The morning after that tense confrontation with Heather, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Things were spiraling, and I couldn't see a way out that didn't end in disaster. I watched Heather as she moved around the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just had a near blow-up about her affair with Josh. She kissed me goodbye, same as always, but it felt colder than usual. And as she walked out the door, I wondered how long she thought she could keep this charade up. Later that day, Carla and I met up again, this time at a quiet spot just outside of town. We both knew the risk of being seen together was higher now, but neither of us could resist the need to vent, to strategize, to feel like we still had control over something. Heather's never going to admit it, I said, leaning against my car. Even when I practically handed her the evidence, she just laughed it off. Like it was all in my head. Carla nodded, her face tense. Josh is doing the same. He's been acting weird, but whenever I try to push him, he just deflects or says I'm being dramatic. We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us lost in our thoughts. I could tell Carla was as frustrated as I was. She kept twisting a ring on her finger, her lips pressed into a tight line. "This isn't working," she said finally, her voice low. "We're not getting anywhere. What do you want to do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Carla looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "We need to make them feel what we're feeling. It's the only way they'll understand." "How?" She paused, glancing down at her hands. "Maybe we stop hiding. Maybe we make it clear we're not blind to what they're doing." My heart pounded in my chest as I processed her words. We'd spent so much time trying to stay one step ahead, keeping our affair secret, plotting behind their backs. But what if we flipped the script? What if we let them see what was happening, made them realize they weren't as clever as they thought? It was risky. It could blow up in our faces. But part of me liked the idea of making them squirm, of seeing Heather and Josh's faces when they realized we weren't the fools they thought we were. "You're saying we let them catch us?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe not catch us," Carla said, her voice firm. "But make them doubt. Make them wonder." A dangerous idea, but it sent a thrill through me. After weeks of being lied to, manipulated, and treated like a fool, the thought of turning the tables had a certain appeal. "We need to be smart about this," I said, feeling a plan start to form in my mind. "If we're going to do this, we can't be careless." Carla nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I'm ready when you are." As we parted ways that day, I couldn't help but feel like we were getting closer to something big. The lines between revenge and something else were blurring fast, and the tension in both of our lives was reaching a boiling point. We were on the edge of something, and there was no going back now. The idea of making Heather and Josh doubt themselves stuck with me after that conversation with Carla. The thrill of turning the tables, of making them question everything the way they'd made us, was too tempting to ignore. I didn't tell Carla, but I started making small moves, little hints to mess with Heather's head. That evening, I casually mentioned bumping into Carla at the grocery store, watching for any reaction from Heather. She froze for just a second before shrugging it off, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. That was enough for now. A seed of uncertainty. Carla texted me later, asking how things were going, and I told her about Heather's reaction. I think she's starting to get suspicious." Carla, "Good. Let her wonder." Over the next few days, we kept dropping small hints, nothing too obvious. Carla mentioned to Josh that she was thinking of visiting me for advice on something, and I could tell from her messages that it rattled him. He didn't say much, but that was the point. We wanted them both to start feeling the same paranoia we had lived with for months. It was working. Slowly, Heather and Josh were becoming more cautious, more distant, like they were trying to figure out if they were still in control. They weren't. Carla and I were done playing by their rules. We were ready to show them that we weren't as blind as they thought. The days felt like a slow unraveling. Heather became quieter, more guarded, like she sensed something off. Small hints I dropped, mentioning Carla, casual remarks about running into her, seemed to land. Heather didn't react much, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. That was enough for now. Carla and I kept the pressure on Josh, too. She'd mention me in passing, just enough to rattle him. It was working. Josh started asking more questions, getting paranoid. Every little move was tightening the screws. But it wasn't without risk. Carla texted me one night, nervous. "Carla, Josh is suspicious. He keeps asking where I've been." Me, Heather's the same. "She's acting weird, but she won't admit anything." It felt like the walls were closing in on all of us. But we were so close, and I wasn't backing out. Not now. As Heather and Josh's suspicion grew, so did our sense of control. They were starting to feel the doubt we'd lived with for so long. And the best part? They had no idea how deep we were into their lives. We weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The more we pushed, the more fragile things became. Heather and Josh weren't fools. They were starting to feel the cracks. Heather had grown distant, watching me more closely. She didn't say anything, but her actions told me enough. The doubt had crept in, and I could see her second-guessing every little thing. Carla was facing the same with Josh. He had been acting more on edge, asking questions about her schedule and giving her these probing looks. We'd done our part to plant the seeds of suspicion, and now it was blooming into full-blown paranoia. But we weren't done yet. We still needed that final move to blow it all up. One night, after another awkward dinner with Heather where we barely spoke, I got a text from Carla. "Carla, Josh is losing it. He keeps asking if I'm seeing someone." Me, Heather's suspicious, but still denying everything. "We're getting close." Carla had a suggestion. "What if we gave them the proof they're looking for? We could let them walk in on us, like we know they've been doing to us." The idea of setting up a staged affair was reckless but thrilling. If we let them catch us, it would turn everything upside down. There'd be no more lying, no more guessing games, just raw, undeniable truth thrown back in their faces. How would we do it? I asked, already imagining the scene in my head. "We pick a night when they're both supposed to be busy," Carla replied. "But we make sure they find out where we are. Just enough to make them think they're catching us in the act." It was risky, but it made sense. We'd been playing this game for too long, and it was time to up the stakes. No more sneaking around. No more hidden messages. We were going to force them to face the betrayal head-on. We planned everything down to the last detail, knowing we had to be careful. If anything went wrong, if either of them caught wind of the setup, we'd lose everything. But if it worked, it would be the ultimate revenge. Heather and Josh would know exactly what it felt like to be betrayed, just like they had done to us. As we wrapped up the conversation, I couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. It was dangerous, but it was also exhilarating. This was it, the final push. Carla sent one last message before we ended the night. "Carla, we're almost there. Let's finish this." I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. We were about to blow everything up, our marriages, our lives. But deep down, I knew this was the only way forward. There was no turning back now. The days leading up to the trap felt like living on the edge of a knife. Carla and I were carefully balancing everything, playing our roles at home while coordinating the final blow. The tension in my house was thick. Heather wasn't saying much, but I could feel her watching me, analyzing every move I made. She was suspicious, but she wasn't ready to confront me. Not yet. Josh, from what Carla said, was on the verge of losing it. He'd been grilling her about her schedule, pushing her for answers she couldn't give. Carla played her part perfectly, deflecting his questions, acting just suspicious enough to keep him on edge but not give away too much. The plan was simple. We'd let them catch us in a carefully staged moment. Heather and Josh had been sneaking around behind our backs for months, lying to us like we were clueless. Now, We were going to make them feel that same helplessness. They thought they were in control. We were about to show them otherwise. We picked the perfect night. Josh had a business trip, and Heather had a dinner with coworkers. Or so they said. We knew better. Carla and I coordinated everything, the location, the timing, even the small details like what we'd wear to make it all seem believable. That night, I told Heather I had plans to meet a friend after work. She didn't question it, but I saw her glance at her phone, probably texting Josh, coordinating their own little rendezvous. I smiled to myself, knowing what was coming. Carla texted me as I left the house. Carla, it's all set. Josh is on his way. He thinks I'm out shopping. Me, same here. Let's do this. We met at a small hotel on the edge of town, far enough away that Heather and Josh wouldn't think to look for us there. But we made sure they'd know. I sent a quick message to Heather, casually mentioning where I'd be, just in case. Carla did the same with Josh. We knew they'd both be curious enough to check it out. Inside the hotel room, Carla and I paced, nerves on edge. This was it. The moment we'd been building toward for weeks. If everything went according to plan, they'd walk in, see us together, and finally know what it felt like to be betrayed. What if they don't come? Carla asked, her voice tense. They will, I said, more confident than I felt. They won't be able to resist. We didn't have to wait long. About an hour later, we heard footsteps in the hallway. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my pulse racing. Carla stood next to me, her face pale but determined. The door creaked open, slowly at first, like they were trying not to be heard. And then there they were. Heather and Josh, standing in the doorway, eyes wide, frozen in shock. They hadn't expected this. They'd come thinking they'd catch us in something minor, maybe snooping on them. But what they found was us together, in the very same betrayal they'd been indulging in for months. Heather's face turned red, her eyes flicking between me and Carla, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Josh was no better, his expression twisted in confusion and anger, like he couldn't process what he was seeing. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence was thick, filled with the weight of all the lies, all the betrayal. I could see the realization dawning on them, the truth sinking in. They had been caught in their own game, and there was no escaping it now. Heather was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fury. I stood up slowly, locking eyes with her. "You tell me, Heather," I said, my voice cold. "You've been lying to me for months. You and Josh. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out?" Josh looked at Carla, his face pale. "You knew?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carla nodded, her expression hard. "Of course I knew. You think you're so clever, sneaking around behind my back? I've known for a while, Josh. And now you know what it feels like." Heather took a step forward, her face twisted with anger. "So what, this is revenge? You're just as bad as we are." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "No, Heather. We're not as bad as you. We're worse. Because we did this knowing exactly what you were doing. And now you get to live with it." The room fell silent again, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. Heather and Josh stood there, shell-shocked, the reality of the situation hitting them hard. Carla and I had won. We'd turned the tables, taken back control. But as I stood there, looking at the mess we'd made, I couldn't help but wonder what came next. There was no going back now. Our marriages, our friendships, they were all in pieces. But in that moment, I didn't care. We had done what we set out to do. Heather and Josh were finally feeling the same betrayal they'd so casually inflicted on us. And that, for now, was enough.